Hi guys, and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop. My name is Daniel and this is another part in the video series where I'm building my Phoenix Rising guitar. In the last episode I made not one, not two, but 3 inlays, and in this episode we're going to look at the final results of the last fretboard we made, and then hopefully we can start working on the neck. So let's start by putting aside the neck and take a look at what we've done last week. Off camera I did some cleaning up on both the practice piece and the Obsidian Ebony fretboard. This is where I've poured the epoxy resin, and I'll be sure to include a close-up, as well as our practice piece on the black limba. So before we can continue to work on the neck, of course we have to take the ebony fretboard out of the clamps, and I'm really excited to see how this one turned out. And if you haven't seen the previous episode, I highly recommend looking up that video. I did a lot of work on the inlays and I showed my process in, I think, a lot of detail. And we also added the final outside binding, and that's the first thing we're going to work on in this episode. I'm going to route the fretboard to the final shape, and then we can sand in the radius. See, there's a lot of masking tape to remove. So I'll see you guys in a moment when I've cleaned up the entire fretboard. So the masking tape is removed, and for the first time we can have some idea of what this fretboard is going to look like, hopefully before this episode is done. But there's still some work to do, like for example getting it back to size. And I'm going to start by cutting off these 2 parts and cutting the fretboard to length before I'm going to address the sides with a template and my router table. But first let's take out a Japanese saw and remove these 2 pointy bits. And to do so I'm going to use this little block, of which I know is perfectly straight and square, and a clamp. And I'm going to try and clamp this block flush with the nut line. So I take a little hammer and my square. And make sure it's flush with the nut line, like so. Put my little saw flush against the wooden block. And carefully make those cuts. That's one. You can see I'm cutting this very, very carefully. Here we go. just to make absolutely sure it's nice and flat. I'm using a chisel. Yeah, I think I'm there. Tiny bit. Yeah, now it's nice. Perfect. Now let's do the other side. And to cut the fretboard to length at the bridge side, what I'm going to do, I want the end of the bridge to have the same spacing as between the 23rd and 24th fret. So I'm going to measure this. And this is 9 millimeters. So I'm going to do the same right here. My clamp is just in the way, unfortunately. So this is 9 millimeters, and that's perfect. There's only 1 millimeter in between the end of the fretboard and the last orange line. So just as we've planned. Now I'm going to take my protractor and use the center line. Yeah, and then using the same little block on that line and a clamp. And I'm putting the block just on the line, or maybe a tiny bit over the line. And if needed, now this gives me just a thousandth of a mil to sand back if needed, but I don't think so. So I can start cutting. Again, very careful, making sure my saw stays in contact with the wooden block. Maybe even help it with my finger like so. Come on. Here we go. And again, using a chisel just to clean it up. I'm a tiny bit proud here. So nice and flush and a nice straight line for the end of the fretboard. And of course we shouldn't forget to transfer the center line back over the edge. Like so. So now that the fretboard is cut to length, I'm going to make sure that the underside is nice and flat. And to do so, I'm going to put the fretboard in my vices. And I'm going to use a highly precision straight edge. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's a high precision straight edge. I think if you're into mechanical engineering, you've used this before to make sure something is dead flat. So I'm going to check the fretboard, and it's not too bad actually, but it could use some work with a cabinet scraper. just to clean it up a bit. One side is a bit dull. For anyone shouting at me that I shouldn't pull on a cabinet scraper, you can pull a cabinet scraper, and in fact this is a thicker cabinet scraper that's, according to the manufacturer, is meant to be pulled, but you can do both. And it gives me perfect shaving, so very nice to use to clean up a fretboard. Yeah, almost there. And of course, if you like sanding, you could also use a leveling beam and level the fretboard with that. Also very viable, but yeah, I think I've mentioned this in a previous video, and if not, I mentioned this in a live stream. I'm starting to using cutting tools more and more. I'm getting more confident with sharp tools instead of abrasives. It's quicker and cleaner most of the times. So yeah, check one last time. So yeah, I think I'm there, and yeah, next step is sticking this fretboard to a template, or maybe I'm going to use the actual neck to cut these side strips down to size using the bandsaw and the router table. Then I have to think if I want some fret position markers or not, but I have some time to think about that, because afterwards, when everything is down to size, I'm going to sand the radius into this fretboard. So I have some time to think about whether or not to do some fret position markers. I'm going to do some side dots, but I'm not sure if I want anything else in this neck just yet. So yeah, I'm going to clean up the workbench and stick this to a template. I decided to use the actual neck as a template for the fretboard, and that's because of two things. First of all, I can be sure when I use the neck as a template that the fretboard will fit the neck, of course. And the other thing is I only have to align everything once instead of having to align the fretboard with the template, and then when the fretboard is done having to align it with the neck again. I can now do it in one go. So I've marked each side of the fretboard with a center line, and the center line is still on this neck. So I can use a couple of clamps, and I'm really starting to like these types of clamps for some reason. So I can align it right here, and put a clamp right here for now. Take a small little hammer and tap the fretboard in place. Yeah, and I'm starting to like these clamps, these types of clamps more and more. You can use them to just hold on to your part, so you can have some wiggle room and you can adjust things, and when you squeeze them down they start to tighten up real good. So yeah, it's a bit getting used to, but I sure starting to enjoy having these clamps around. So now let's concentrate a bit and getting the neck aligned, or the fretboard aligned perfectly to the neck. Here we go, one side. I think we're there. Oh. Yeah, this is perfectly square to the center line. Going to use an additional clamp just for now, so I'm sure nothing moves. Come on. One final check, and guys, it's hot here. Guys, I can't stress enough the importance of this stage of the build, aligning the fretboard with your actual neck. Take your time, spend as much time as you think you need, and only commit when you're absolutely certain that your fretboard is aligned perfect with your neck. So do whatever you can, checking the square of your nut line with the center line, checking the back or the bridge side of your fretboard if it's aligned and nice and perpendicular to your center line, if it's nice and centered. I'm, for example, measuring between my center line and the two orange stripes on each side of this fretboard. It's quite a good indicator if everything is aligned. Yeah, everything seems to be fine and everything is aligned. So I can tighten everything down, and to make sure I can align the fretboard each time exactly the same to the neck, because I just said I only have to align it once by doing it this way. And that's that. I'm going to use a tiny little drill bit and a cocktail stick, and I'm going to drill a tiny hole through one of the fret slots into the neck, and this gives me a guide pin to use every time I need to align the neck. I know I can safely drill about 14 mils from the center line, because I don't want to be too close to the edge, because then there's a chance of the tiny guide pin showing when shaping the neck. But I don't want it to be too close to the center line, because that gives me some increases the wiggle room, so to say. I can't recall what it's called in English, but yeah, I'm going to use a tiny little hand drill and make sure I'm dead center in the fret slot. Come on. Just like that. Snip off the end of the cocktail stick. Yeah, here we go. Put in this cocktail stick and drill another hole on the other side of the fretboard. Where's my pencil? And let's start drilling this little hole. So let's put away this little hand drill. It's always nice to have a small little hand tool like this. Oh. And now I can safely remove the clamps, because with these guide pins in place I can always realign the fretboard to the neck very easily. So, like so. And now I'm going to stick the fretboard temporarily in place using, of course, masking tape and super glue, so I can use the bandsaw and the router table to cut the sides flush, to trim the sides flush, that's better English, with the neck blank. Come on. Come on. Now I can put some masking tape and some super glue on both the fretboard and the neck itself. Yep, come on. It should be easy, because the stripes in the center of the neck are the exact same width as my tape, as you can see. Okay, and always put the super glue on, in this case the fretboard, so your most important part. I don't mind gluing the tape to the neck. I can use a scraper to remove that, but I don't want the neck to be glued to the fretboard. So just enough to keep it in place. I'm going to use tiny, a bit longer skewers, and you can see the pin sticking through, and I had a hope it would pierce the tape. So make sure this is nice and flat like so. And put the other one through as well. Yeah, that sticks through the tape quite nice. Make sure it's the good way around, and now I can use the index pin to find these holes. And I wait for the glue to set. So guys, the fretboard is stuck to the neck, and I removed the two guide pins. And now I can flip the neck and fretboard upside down and very carefully use the bandsaw to cut away most of the excess from the side of the fretboard. Of course, we're going to need some light, dust extraction. It's been a while since we had some dust extraction running. Glass gate open, and let's start cutting. Remove some masking tape. And let's do the other side. And to trim the edge of the fretboard flush with the rest of the neck, of course I'm going to use a flush trim bit in my router table. I'm not going to bother hooking up all the dust extraction for just a bit. It's too hot. Here we go. And the other side. So the sides of the fretboard are trimmed flush with the rest of the neck, and I'm pretty pleased with how this fretboard turned out. And yeah, now I have to think a moment about doing fret position markers or not. Yeah, I have to think about it, but as you can undoubtedly see, it's very hot. So I'm going to get out of this heat, get something to drink, take a break, but I'll be right back with you guys with my final decision on whether or not to do fret position markers, and then we're going to take off the fretboard and start sanding in the radius. So guys, I'm back in the workshop, and it's been a couple of days, but now finally the temperature has gone down a bit. It's still pretty warm here in the workshop, but it's late evening now, so hopefully I can get some work done while the workshop is cooling a bit. And also, you might have noticed the audio changed a little. That's because I'm back on my single microphone on the camera. Well, when I fled the workshop due to the heat in the last clip, I forgot to recharge my wireless microphone system. So for now and the next couple of minutes, I'll be using just a single mic. But I can't waste any more time. So let's get back to working on our fretboard. And yeah, I decided to do some fret position markers on this fretboard. And off camera I already did some tests because I want to stay in the theme of the inlay of having an aluminium core and an orange outline for my fret position markers. But of course, before I start drilling the holes for the fret position markers, I have to figure out and mark where I want them to go. I'm going to make very tiny fret position markers, only 3.5 millimeter in diameter, and I want them to be placed exactly in between the low E and the low A string along that line. So to determine where to place them, I'm first going to take a nut that I'm going to use on this guitar, a similar nut, so I can mark the low A, the low E, the low A and the high E. And this is important because when I've designed this fretboard, I made sure that both E strings always run parallel along the edges of the fretboard. So now I can take this measurement, 4 millimeters for the high E string and 5 for the low E string, and transfer them to the other side of the fretboard. 4 millimeters right here and 5 millimeters right there. And now I'm going to use a string spacing ruler to find where the low A string is on this side of the fretboard, and I think I have to be somewhere around here. And the way these rulers work is they have all kinds of slots, some high and some lower on the ruler, and when a pair of 6, so 6 low ones or 6 high ones, if the first and the sixth one align with the mark where your high and low E are going to be placed, that's where your string spacing, and you can move the ruler one slot over each time. And if your first string and your last string are on a high slot, so where the slot is higher on the ruler, those 6 slots are your strings. And if the first and the last of your strings end up equal to a lower slot, then the 6th lowest are your strings. And you have to, of course, take care on what the bass and what the treble side is. Yeah, I have to use these 2 lower ones, and this is going to be my A and my E string. Still pretty hot. And now I'm going to find the center between those 2 marks I've just made. Oh, and they're exactly 10 millimeters apart, so that's very easy to find the center here. And I'm going to do the same on the other side, but I don't need to use the ruler because I've used the nut. And I can find the center here as well. It's here, they are 7 millimeters apart. So now with these 2 marks made, I can now take a longer ruler and join these marks. And this should be aligned, perfectly aligned in between the low A and the low E string, low E and low A. It's a bit complicated for us Dutch, because the pronunciation of E in English in Dutch is A. It's the A and the A string. So it always gets confusing when translating E to A and the other way around. So yeah, I've got my line drawn in for the fret position markers, and now of course I have to determine the center, but with a protractor, an Incra protractor for those curious. You can find a affiliated Amazon link to them in the video description down below. 1, 2, 3. I can easily find the center. Do I want them at the center though? We're always so used of having the fret dot dead center, but why not put it a tiny bit higher, or just above the fret maybe? There. Maybe just... Maybe. Let's see, if I draw in a mark about 8 millimeters above each fret. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, I think I'm there, and hopefully it shows up on camera like so. And I'm going to explain real quick what I've done. For the 3rd, 5th, 7th and 9th fret, I've marked the position for the fret marker 8 millimeters from the center of the fret. So these will be slightly offset, 8 millimeters above the fret they corresponded to. And for the 15th fret, it was a coincidence, a lucky coincidence, but 8 millimeters was the dead center between the 14th and the 15th fret. So here I'm at the center again, and I decided for the following fret markers to keep them at the center. It made the most sense. So 17 is at the center, 19, 21 and the 24th as well. And for the 2nd position I used the string spacing ruler again, like so. So here's my E string, my A string, and right in between the E and the A. And I didn't notice this when I measured this, but you can just use this mark for the center. And here's my A and my D string. So in between those is where I want to put my 2nd marker for the 24th fret. So it should end up in between the A and the D string on this guitar. So Now with those marks made, I'm going to double check them just to be sure, and then I'm going to drill some tiny holes. So yeah, I'll be right back. So let's put these aside. And you know what the nice part is of having a nice and light pillar drill is that I can show you real close what I'm doing. So I've set up the pillar drill with a 2mm drill bit, and I've set the depth stop to 3.5mm deep. So I've zeroed it out on the fretboard, so this is 0 and I can only drill 3.5mm deep. I've marked where I want my fret position marker to be with an awl, and now I can start drilling the tiny 2mm holes first. Make sure it's centered, and when it is, drill the hole. So here we go. Now change this bit for a slightly larger one and make sure it's very high quality drill bits, very sharp, very high quality, because you don't want any tear out, and that's where I'm a bit scared of right now, that I will have some tear out that I can't mask because of, again, using a highlight color instead of ebony dust. So, and now with a 3.5mm drill bit, I can very carefully add the second outer ring. But first I have to make sure I've set my depth stop correctly. So I'm going to set this to 0. Come on, 0 please, thank you. And I want this to go 3mm down. Approximately. Like so, and this takes a bit of a steady hand. But yeah, I can set my depth stop. And by using 3mm, I'm sure that when setting the radius, I won't send through the thing. I can maybe use 2.5. Yeah, maybe 2.5. Let's see, we can always go a bit deeper. Let's drill the first hole. Oh yeah, this is perfect. And to make sure I'm nicely centered on this hole, you notice me not holding my fretboard too tight. I let the drill bit find the center. You'll see. You saw the fretboard wiggling around, and now you can, I think it shows up on camera. If not, you have to take it from me. This is now exactly centered on the hole. Next one. Other way around, it's safer. And I drilled the other hole in a previous clip. That's the magic of recording videos. So after drilling all the holes for the fret position markers, I'm going to make sure that all the edges are nice and crisp and that there are no burrs or fibers left by the drill bit. So I'm going to take some sandpaper in a sanding block, and it's just 320 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to very carefully sand the edges and make sure, like I said, that there are no fibers sticking out. And make sure there's no dust in these holes. So, and to make the fret position markers, I'm going to use some aluminum wire, some medium viscosity super glue, and of course some mica pigment, the same orange metallic pigment I used last episode on the inlay. And of course I need some pliers, and I've polished these pliers yesterday, so they're nice and sharp again. And the process is quite simple, to be honest. First I'm going to put a tiny drop of CA glue inside the hole we just drilled. So let's try and give you a better overview. And I'm using this skewer to guide the super glue into the hole a bit, so I don't smear CA glue all over the fretboard. I'm going to make sure it's all the way down in the hole. Usually there's an air bubble underneath the CA glue, so I'm using the skewer to get rid of that tiny air bubble. Use the aluminium wire, put it into the hole, and I have to make sure it's down into the tiny 2mm hole we just drilled. I need a bit more light, unfortunately. And because it's wedged into that tiny little hole, I can bend it just a little, and that's why I'm keeping it a bit oversized. And try and make sure it's nice and centered. Out comes the orange dust. and try to put it into those gaps. So very carefully use a skewer or a tiny little brush to get it in there. So let's do the other one, and before I'm going to flood it with super thin super glue and fill the rest of these gaps, I decided to first mask the 2 fret slots because I was afraid I would fill them up with super glue. So let's do the other one. Again, a drop of super glue in with the skewer, maybe a bit more, tiny bit more maybe. Make sure that the 2mm hole down below is filled with super glue. Take a piece of wire. Yeah, make sure it's in there. And make sure it's nice and centered in the hole. Seems like it. And add some dust. And now I'm also going to add some very thin super glue. Just to make sure everything is filled nicely with dust. And you can see how much of the mica powder is dissolved by the thin CA glue and soaks into the 2 gaps. And now let this cure for a moment. So guys, I think I perfected my method a bit, because I have various degrees of messiness to this side. But I think I found the best way to do this is to first insert the piece of aluminium. Now I can check if it's nice and centered. Use again a skewer, but use the tiny CA glue and let it run over the skewer until the gap is full of glue. And then add a tiny bit of the mica powder on top. And use the skewer to let it soak into the super glue. So yeah, enough messing around with CA glue and orange pigment. Yeah, I'm going to leave the glue cure for a couple of minutes, so I'm absolutely certain that everything has fully hardened, fully cured, and then I can take my cutters and snap off all the aluminium pieces and take my leveling beam and sand it nice and flat so we can take a look at the end result. So yeah, I can't wait any longer. It's time to start cutting the aluminium wire and find out what the end result is. And this is fairly easy. Just put a very nice polished fret end cutter to the fretboard and just cut all these pieces. And here we go. Make sure, yeah, everything feels, oh, nice and hot. Nice and hot. Nice and hard. So yeah, all pieces are cut. Time to put it on the bench. And I'm going to make sure I've removed all those offcuts, because they will make a dent in your fretboard. So make sure there's nothing left on your bench. Nope. To prevent damage, a filler block at each end of the fretboard. Better need a smaller one. Like so. And I think I'm first going to use a file to make quick work of the piece of aluminium and the super glue. And here I have to be careful not to hit the inlay too much. On the other hand, I still have to sand in the radius, so, but hey. So that's 180 grit, some 240. So, fretboard is nice and clean again, and here are all the position markers. I think it's a nice touch. Wow. Yeah, guys, I'm really happy with how these fret position markers turned out, and I'm very glad I decided to do them on the fretboard. And I also think they're quite unique. Let me know in the comment section down below. But I can't recall having ever seen fret position markers like this, where the core is aluminium and there's a colored ring on the outside. Usually you see them the other way around. You see a aluminium or a brass tube as a fret position marker filled with a resin, usually black or white. But yeah, I can't recall having ever seen fret position markers like these. So yeah, if you did, let me know in the comment section down below. And I'm also curious what you think of this type of position markers. So yeah, I'm very, very happy with how this fretboard is turning out, and I can't wait to see it on a finished neck. But yeah, there are some steps to go, and the next step is of course sanding in the radius. But yeah, as you can see, it's already dark outside and I really need to go to bed. There's a full day of work tomorrow before in the evening I can get back here to the workshop and work on this fretboard some more. So yeah, due to the power of video editing and YouTube, I'm going to take a nap, but I'll be back with you in just a couple of seconds. It's the next day and I'm back in the workshop, so it's time to start sanding the radius into our fretboard. And to help me do so, I'm going to try something new, of course. First of all, I got myself a new sanding beam, a nice 12-inch extruded aluminium sanding beam. And hopefully this will help me to be even more precise than my previous homemade one. And to help me even further and hopefully save me some time, I also made this little jig. It's pretty straightforward. It's a quarter sawn piece of wood that I specifically selected because it was nice and flat and straight. I've drawn a center line on that piece of wood on the bottom and added two sides to the jig. And the sides are spaced in such a way that my sanding beam fits in nice and snug. It can still move easily back and forth, but there's not enough room for it to rock from side to side. So this hopefully helps me sanding in the radius more efficient and more accurate than when I used to do it 100% by hand. So, and of course the first thing I need to do is use some masking tape and some super glue to stick the fretboard into the jig. So nice white piece of masking tape. Come on. Into the jig, and of course on the back of a fretboard. Oh, and first of course make sure the center line is still visible. I'm going to make it a bit more obvious where it is. Right there. And right there. masking tape. No. How difficult can it be to stick a piece of tape to a fretboard? Here we go. And some super glue. And we don't need much at all, it's just to keep it in place. Center line right here. And right there. So, and wait for a moment. So, and while the glue dries, I'm going to attach some 120 grit sandpaper to the radius beam. Of course, put some masking tape on the beam first. Get rid of the excess. And let's get some sandpaper. Yeah, I'm going to start with 120 grit. And I think I soon will go down or up to 180 grit. And as a tip, I also put masking tape on my sandpaper, and that's because the super glue can soak into the back of your sandpaper and you will see it in your sanding pattern. And by applying masking tape, it adds yeah, let's call it a slight barrier between your sandpaper and your super glue. And this doesn't have to be that precise as long as there's no overlap. Yeah, and we can use some super glue. You could also use, how do you call it, a self-adhesive sandpaper. So essentially sandpaper with an adhesive backing. But I think using these rolls in some masking tape and some super glue, when you use a lot of sandpaper, having these rolls and doing it like this, I think is cheaper. Let's find something to cut on. I still don't like cutting directly onto my workbench. Not this knife. Don't use your good knives to cut sandpaper, guys. Remove the tape and save this to use on your leveling beam. So guys, I can put the jig on my workbench using a bench dog on either side and my vise, so I can clamp it in. And now let's try this beast of a sanding beam. It fits in snug. Maybe one day I'm going to add two handles, two holders to help me get a nice grip on it. Yeah, I'm getting a radius, but it's going to take a while. This is a nice workout, and something I've learned is that you shouldn't apply too much pressure on your sandpaper, especially with the coarser grits, because it clogs, the ebony clogs your sandpaper up real quick. So in my experience, you don't need to exert a lot of pressure or have to apply a lot of pressure. Just keep some pressure on it and keep a nice and even back and forth motion. And also guys, when you're sanding, keep a brush at hand and clean your sandpaper as often as you can or as you allow yourself to do so. Because the sandpaper, especially the coarser grits, tend to clog up real quick with the ebony, and when it is clogged up too much, you get a nasty result on your fretboard. And at some point your sandpaper won't be sanding anymore and you have to replace it. So yeah, taking your time to occasionally, as often as you can, clean your sandpaper. It makes your sandpaper last a lot longer, and it also gives you a quicker and better result on your fretboard. And I think having this jig was a good idea. I can already tell all the dust is collecting mostly inside the jig, so it isn't as dusty as it used to be when I was sanding in a radius. And these are the final few passes and the radius is in. And I have to be honest with you guys, I did most of the sanding during a live stream. So if you want to learn more about the entire process, you want to see me sand the radius in real time, I highly recommend looking up that live stream. But now we're going to continue the video. So I've sanded the radius, and during that live stream I switched the sandpaper on my sanding beam from 120 to 180 grit, and that's fine enough for now. And I like my fretboards to have the sides an equal thickness. There's two ways you can sand in the radius, and that's create an equal thickness, meaning that you have to sand more on the nut side, but your sides have an equal thickness along the entire length. Or you can sand it at a taper. That means you don't have to remove as much material from your fretboard, but your sides will be slightly tapered. And I think that always looks weird. So now I'm going to check if I've done a good job by taking my caliper and I'm going to measure the 4 outer corners, the height of them. Looks good. Looks good as well. And yeah, I think I'm there, but just to clean up some of the scratches made by the leveling beam, I'm going to take a secondary sanding block, also 12-inch radius, but with a 220 grit sandpaper. And just for now, I'm going to just clean up the fretboard ever so slightly. Just to give it a nicer look and feel. And once the fretboard is attached to the neck, of course we're going to use a leveling beam, and then we're going to make sure everything is nice and straight. But for now, my main concern is getting the radius nice and even and have a consistent thickness along the edges. So I'm happy. Now I can carefully try and remove the fretboard from this jig. I'm very carefully twisting my putty knife on one side and now on the other, because I don't want to break the fretboard in half. So never rip off your fretboard. And here we go. One radiused fretboard, nice and thin. Our perfect fretboard. And yeah, let's check the radius. Yeah. Very consistent, and yeah, I must say I used to sand the radius into the fretboard with the fretboard already attached to the neck. I thought that would give me a better result, and I never saw much use of a jig like this. But I must say, up until this point, I'm very impressed with this jig. It really helped me save some time because I didn't have to take as much care as I used to do when sanding in the radius. This jig helped me to keep the sanding beam perfectly aligned with the neck. It prevented rocking, so it prevented me from accidentally sanding more one side more than the other, and it also helped me keep the leveling beam nice and level to the fretboard. So yeah, I'm very impressed with this little jig, and of course the Guitars and Wood sanding beam, both the long one and the shorter one. So they are a great addition to the workshop. Right now I'm going to put this jig aside, and I've noticed I have some repairs or some cleaning up to do around the edges of the inlay. There have been some bubbles here and there, and same goes for one or two of these fret position dots. So I'm going to do that off camera because I need to concentrate and need to focus to do some repairs, but it's essentially opening up the gap just a little with a scalpel blade or a tiny little pin, and then drip in some very thin super glue and some mica dust, sand it back until we're back at this stage. So yeah, next step for this video will be, I think, gluing the fretboard to the neck. So guys, I'll be right back. So guys, I'm done refining some of the details on the inlay, the fret marker dots and the entire fretboard. So now it's finally time to glue the fretboard to the neck blank, and we're finally off to making a guitar. And I'm very excited about this, if you, if you haven't already noticed. So first, of course, I have to insert the truss rod into the cavity. And it's a nice and tight fit, so no rattling around. I might need to give it a small little tap. So it's in there, nice and tight, so it won't rattle once the guitar is done. And I'm going to make sure I can still access the adjustment nut, which I can, and I'm going to also make sure that there's no tension at all on the truss rod when gluing up the fretboard. Next step, a bit of masking tape, and I'm using a very thin, narrow but also very thin masking tape to cover up the truss rod channel. I'm going to make sure I stick it down just on the edge of the channel, and take a knife, cut it off right here at the knot line. And I'm also going to cut it a bit narrower. Is that the correct word? Cut it so it's a bit narrow, more narrow. Yep. Very close to the edge. Like so. So it just covers the truss rod channel. And that's because I don't want any glue to seep into that channel while gluing up. And I'm using this very thin masking tape, and I can leave it in place when gluing on the fretboard. It's so thin, but if you don't trust this, or when you're using some thicker masking tape, for example the paper-like masking tape, of course you can remove the masking tape after you've spread the glue and just before you're going to clamp down your fretboard onto your neck blank. You can remove the masking tape, but then make sure you don't use too much glue. You don't want any glue to seep into your truss rod channel. So yeah, let's get some clamps at the ready and apply some glue and glue this fretboard in place. So everything is ready for the big glue up. First I'm going to insert the guide pins to help me locate the fretboard once the glue is applied. Oh, one barely fits and one falls right through. Well, it doesn't really matter that much, just keep track of it. First, of course, apply some glue, just some regular Titebond. And one thing I'm going to do, maybe a bit wider, before I forget, I'm going to put some masking tape where the end of the fretboard is going to be. Just a hairline from that pencil line. And same for the nut line. So where the nut is going to be. And this, hopefully, if there's some squeeze out on either side of the fretboard, having that masking tape here might prevent a lot of cleaning up on a later stage, especially where the nut is. You don't want too much glue right there. All right. Some glue right here. And a bit of glue right there. And you can use either a brush or an old credit card or debit card or whatever, library card, to spread the glue. And I'm going to change things up a bit. I'm going to use this card. I usually use a brush, but a card is a bit quicker, to be honest. And it's easier to clean up. Yeah, make sure it's spread evenly. Like so. And there's almost no cleanup. You don't have a brush that's full of glue. Now let's see if I can find the locating holes. There's one. Let's find the other one. Yeah, it should be there. Yeah, it's all the way down. Same here. Some fret end nippers. And a small little chisel to make sure they're nice and flush. And I like to use these foam rubber, what you call it, pieces. I once had a shorter one. They're the same size, but the same thickness. So I'm going to use these two. And then I'm going to use my old radius beam as a clamping coil. And I'm using these foam rubber sheets, let's call them, to even out the pressure and prevent any damage done to the fretboard. The fretboard shouldn't be able to slide because of those two locator pins. But it doesn't hurt to check. Seems to be okay. Two small clamps to hold everything in place. And now I can use these bigger clamps. To really clamp everything down. Come on, one there. And like I said earlier in this video, I really start to appreciate these clamps. They were a bit getting used to, but they have a lot of holding power and they're pretty easy to set up. And I think if I bought a better quality, they would be even great, even better. Let's see, come on. There's some even squeeze out, so that's always nice. And we're done. I think I'm going to remove some of the excess glue already, but yeah, all we have to do now is wait for the glue to set overnight, and then tomorrow we can see the end result. So here we are, it's the next day, time to remove the clamps and check the final result. Here we go. Wow. Looks absolutely stunning, and I'm pretty pleased with how this fretboard turned out. Yeah guys, I'm very happy with how this fretboard turned out, but unfortunately this is all I have time for this week. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, let me know by leaving a like, leaving a comment, question or suggestion in the comment section down below. This helps others to find my content, and in the long run will help me grow my channel and making this all possible for me. So yeah, next video will be me shaping this neck, so it's going to be an interesting one. So make sure you have your notifications turned on, and if you're new to this channel, make sure you are subscribed and hit that little bell icon underneath and set it to notify all, so you get notified when I upload something new and you don't have to miss out on any of my future content. That said, I hope you join me all in the workshop next time, but until then, as always, take care and bye bye.